Hey, Karina.
Oh,
So today's discussion is pretty pretty loaded content.
yeah, I guess I'll get started by saying what the first question is.
Hmm.
Discuss with your partner how you feel about the way elders age in America and what dynamics you see playing an important role in detecting, preventing, and reporting elder or dependent adult abuse. I think when first reading that question, I think a lot about how in America, especially in comparison to other cultures, elders aren't really seen in the same dynamic. Like I'm Latino, and I feel like elders in my community are really taken care of. Like my sister and mom live together. They're not seen as elderly per se. It's more of like a wisdom type of thing, and more of like a respect. Uh, at least that's how I feel in comparison to what I know of more American culture, except for the outliers. And also just how in American culture it's like the obsession with being youthful is like a big part of it too.
Hmm.
So those are like main things I first think of.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like people become invisible as they get older.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's and I've really noticed how my own understanding about it is changing over time. Like I think that older people were sort of invisible to me when I was younger because I was such a product of this culture.
Mhm.
Um, and but then again, I also had a close relationship with my grandmother, the last of my grandparents to stay alive, um, and then she lived in the senior housing, and so after she passed, I continued to stay friends with another resident in the senior housing,
Mhm.
and so he lived to like 103.
Wow.
So over time I like really started, began to treasure
Mhm.
the being able to have relationships with older people, but um I know what you mean about our culture, or American culture rather. Definitely is so different, probably for even immigrant families who are bringing the respect for elders along with them as they arrive here, and have more like it's more normalized for different generations to live under one roof, and that kind of thing. It's definitely something that we can learn from.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a great point too, is like the senior housing. And I actually looked at one practicum site that is in Berkeley called Elder Ashram, and they work with elderly people who have dementia. And it's like a senior housing facility, but then it's like also a holistic therapy facility. It's really interesting. And it was cool to see. It was a lot about how much we could learn from elders, regardless if they have something like dementia, and how important storytelling is in terms of passing down lineage. And yeah, it was a really interesting experience to even just view it when I was walking through there. But yeah, I think I'm a little confused about the second part of the question, which is what dynamics you see playing an important role for the detecting and preventing.
Yeah, I, yeah, I see what you mean.
Mhm.
I'm not 100% sure
Mhm.
of what's being asked, but I guess if I just sort of um, you know, take it as as I feel it, I would just say that um, the dynamics are um, just being sensitive, like, I guess the dynamic of sensitivity, both to the needs of the client, assuming that the client is the elder person, or the dependent adult person, um, just being sensitive to sort of their predicament and that they probably don't have a ton of agency in terms of their ability to kind of move. And so, you know, if something needs to be reported, I could see how it would be like a really word sensitive just keeps coming to me, sensitive kind of situation, because like if you have to report on someone who's actively responsible for meeting that person's needs, you don't want to create like conflict in the before it's getting worked out. Like if it's the manager of the um, retirement home or assisted living home, that's a problem. Who do you report them to and keep the elders safe from repercussions of having, maybe gotten them in trouble or
Right, yeah. Yeah, that makes more sense to me, yeah, definitely.
yeah. And I guess maybe also just noticing what's happening with the client in terms of, very similar to with child abuse, you're looking for, oh, well, where did you get that bruise? Like just noticing if the person has unusual or frequent injuries, um, or, there's their body language, if they seem um, like physically anxious um, around certain people, maybe, and then also, are they losing weight quickly? Like things like that, or would be things to notice, I think.
Yeah, like being attuned to any like kind of drastic changes that you could probably notice would be like abusive.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, especially thinking about like a senior facility because there's a lot of like stories of elder abuse in those like settings that I've read over the years or I've heard like news stories about. But
Yeah.
yeah, I wonder. Um, I know in like the reading and the handout it touched a little bit on it, but I wonder what like goes into like if you're working in those facilities, what kind of things go into as like having to report on it as like a clinician.
Mm-hmm.
Like if there's policies involved, they have to like work around and stuff. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah. Should we move on to the second part?
Sure. About child abuse, mandated reporting. What are some situations um, where you're mandated report, you're mandated to report, but you could also decide not to, even risking penalties or consequences for your license, the child, your client, and else? Are there any possibilities that you can imagine where you would want to not report something even though you're legally obligated to?
Yeah, that's hard for me to think of. Like I think the only thing I like kind of was touching on was if there's a family that was houseless, but they were like working towards like having stable housing and like more stable facilities and stuff, like maybe not necessarily reporting that. Um, because that could easily become like a CPS issue. But if it's like known that the child isn't being like abused necessarily or neglected either, um, I wouldn't report on that. It's such like a specific example I could think of, but um,
It's a really good example.
yeah, because
Yeah.
I guess to be like transparent or like open about my own experience, I like at one point when I was younger, we lost our housing, so we lived in a hotel for like a couple years. And I don't know if my parents ever told my teachers or anything, but I feel like if I had like a client when I plan to work in schools that had like a scenario like that, I wouldn't um report it unless I felt like it was dangerous in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that is a really, really good example of a situation where the parents are probably just doing the best they can, and they are just making the best decisions they can in this moment that's hopefully they're hoping is a transitional moment.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot about that, especially with how the nation is with like money and job loss, and I'm sure being a parent is like extremely expensive right now. Uh,
Hmm.
so I'm sure there'll be situations like that that happen like kind of on and off for people. It's so easy for that to happen at this point, but
Yeah.
um yeah, that's kind of the only thing I could really think of. Everything else felt like extreme enough where I would definitely report.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I generally have a hard time thinking of something where I wouldn't want to report it. But when I look at this, the guidelines that she gave us for California sexual assault reporting requirements, a couple of them are, some of them actually seem way too lax to me. Um, like a child age 14 to 15, if it's consensual, you it would not be reportable if a 14-year-old had consensual sex with a 20-year-old.
That one I hated reading. That
Me
one,
too, because I'm like, how do we know this is that's like, what does
yeah,
consensual mean for a 14-year-old?
yeah, exactly.
And
That's like a weird power dynamic because their age.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really, really significant age difference when you're
Mhm.
in those age um categories. And then another thing, one that seemed like, hey, I disagree with this, I wouldn't report this, even though it says it's mandated, is it says here under age 18, you're mandated to report if if the under 18-year-old has with someone of any age uh has reported rape, incest, or sodomy. And my understanding is sodomy means anal sex.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
I'm basically like, this is an this is an anti-gay law because um like if I think, okay, so under 18, so one person is 17, let's say,
Mhm.
and he is in a consensual relationship with a young man who is 18 or 19, and they're practicing anal intercourse, that's not my fucking problem.
Yeah, totally. I felt similar also where I was like, why is that like that wording placed with like rape and incest when it's
Yeah,
yeah, like you're saying, it does feel very
problematic.
specific. Yeah, where I'm just like, I feel like that could also cause some issues, like if the clinician is like homophobic themselves and they're gonna feel like some type of way about it. But especially, yeah, yeah, I felt very similar, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting. Some of the laws are a little surprising.
yeah, I think with like the ages, I mean, I'm always like not surprised, but I guess when I'm reminded that most of the US is like when you're 16, that's the age of consent, it always feels kind of weird because then it's like, well, if a 16-year-old is with someone who's 25, like to me that feels kind of suspicious. But I guess by law, it's not if it's like consensual, and that's where I'm just like that's where my own like moral and value kind of thing comes in, I guess. But
I'm with
yeah.
you. I think it's a rare 16-year-old that has that much self-possession and that much
Mhm.
clarity.
Yeah,
um, to
exactly.
be truly like having sovereignty in a relationship with someone that much older, who could be a very manipulative older person.
Exactly. It's hard for me not to automatically go into thinking they're being like groomed by this older person, you know?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So those were the things that mainly came up when I was like reading through this. I guess that was hard for me to like get over. Um,
Hmm. Yeah. I don't know how it's a little bit relevant to this, but like I have a friend who had a therapist. She was seeing her therapist, and then she told her therapist about something going on with her younger sister that was incest related. And then the therapist became so obsessed with the issue of the younger sister's incest situation that the therapist was no longer like able to help my friend with the things that she was specifically there to work
uh-huh.
on in therapy. So she stopped seeing the therapist. And so um, there's some of the details that I don't really know. Like, for instance, it was happening in a different state, the incest situation.
Mhm.
So I don't know how it transfers if you're practicing in California and your client's in California, and then the client's telling you about a sibling in a different state. I don't know how that works, but the therapist never ended up reporting, and my my friend discontinued therapy. So it was sort of like my friend didn't get the help that she needed. Um, and the, like, you know what I mean? Like basically nothing, like basically everything fell apart in a sense because, yeah. So I think, I guess what that makes me think about is just how many, there can be like lots of different parts to what's happening. And it must be really challenging as a therapist to like figure out which parts are the most important for you to um like what will you sacrifice and what will you prioritize in certain situations. I don't know.
Yeah, that definitely is seems like a complicated case because it's like the degree of separation isn't that big. Like it was your friend's like sister, right?
Hmm.
And it's also kind of goes back to like if you're someone's therapist, you're there to like help with that person. So if they're like, I'm affected by what's happening to my sister, then we're gonna be like, what, how is this affecting you about it?
You. Hmm.
But like, but yeah, it does bring into the like, if this is dangerous for that person, like, yeah, are you as a therapist going to report it, especially if you're in another state? Yeah, that's like so, yeah, again, so many different parts, but yeah, at the end of the day, if that like interferes enough with like your relationship with the client, then you have to like refer them out or something. Even though it's like, why are you referring them out if they're like, it's not like they're bringing this to you necessarily.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I'm curious if, yeah, like our professor could answer something part of that because that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I also do wonder if that is a case that you would even like actually um be a part of, especially if you're not asked to be. Like it'd be different if like, she's reaching out to her therapist for like, oh, can you come to my hearing or something to help my sister out? But that's like a whole other thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know some of the details.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know how old her younger sister was at the time. I
Yeah.
don't know what the specific type of sexual abuse was happening.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know, what the therapist was having to hold.
Yeah. Mm.
And so, I think there's crazy, like there's degrees of like what constitutes a level of harm where you as a therapist just are like, no, I cannot sit here and know that that's happening and not report on it and not do anything
Yeah.
about it. There may be a level of harm where if your client's sitting in front of you saying, no, I don't want you to report this,
Mm-hmm.
and you will not be a good therapist for me if you are completely focused on that while I'm here bringing you something else. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think reading these questions and the reading in general just brought up all those like scenarios of someone's like saying like a hypothetical, like, oh, I want to hurt someone that I know specifically, but I'm not actually going to do anything. Um, like, do you report that? It's just like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot about like, do you trust your client enough for this actually not to be a thing?
Ugh,
Yeah, just
God, I
yeah.
hope no one ever says that to me.
I
Just
know. I
sounds
know. When I was reading
stressful.
those, I was like, I don't even want to think about what I would do in that scenario right now.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
uh,
Great. Well, what do you
well,
think? Think we covered it?
yeah, I think this is good for this week.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Karina.
Mhm.